actually is not the way it actually is not the If you would take this time to find those nifty little mobile devices that we all carry around these days and make sure that they are all silenced, that would be greatly appreciated. That would be greatly appreciated. If you'd please keep the movement in and out of the auditorium once the forum begins to a minimum. If you have an emergency or something that can't wait, certainly feel free to move in and out, but we want to keep that to a minimum during the forum this evening. And I know you'll be respectful of both candidates throughout tonight's forum. As to applause, we'd ask that you keep that to a minimum. We will introduce the candidates, at which time I would invite you to applaud to welcome them to tonight's proceedings, and then I would ask you to please hold your applause until the end of the evening. We will get started right at 6:30, so thanks very much for coming. Good evening. My name is Tim Bremmel, host of your talk show weekday mid-mornings on WCLO Radio, and I am honored to have been asked by both campaigns to moderate tonight's forum. Our candidates for our first congressional district in Wisconsin, incumbent Congressman Paul Ryan and challenger Rob Zerban, are here tonight. Welcome, gentlemen. Thank you for your time. We'd like to thank the University of Wisconsin-Rat County for hosting this evening's event. And as tonight's forum is taking place with a live audience and being covered by a number of different media outlets, we'd ask that all audience members observe silence during the question and answer period and to be respectful of the candidates. Please reserve your applause until the end of this evening's presentation. Here is tonight's format as agreed to by both campaigns. Our candidates will each begin with an opening statement of up to 3 minutes. Following the opening statements, each candidate will have 2 minutes to address each of a number of issues put forth by the moderator. There is no rebuttal period. Following the final question, each candidate will again have up to 3 minutes for their closing remarks. We will begin each round of questioning with alternate candidates following the opening statements, the order of which was determined by a coin toss. The toss was won by Congressman Ryan, so let us begin. Congressman Ryan, your opening remarks.
Well, thank you very much, Tim. First of all, I want to thank the folks here at the Gazette, at WCLO, and here at the UROC campus. I've been coming to UROC since I was 18 years old. This is one of our fine institutions, and I'm really excited to be here, and thank you for hosting this. There are a few ways in which I measure how I do my job. Here is what I see my job as being. I serve as the employee of the hardworking taxpayers of the 1st Congressional District. And as their representative of the federal government, there are 3 components to my job that I take very seriously. Number 1, I think it's important to offer principled representation. What do I mean when I say that? Tell people who you are, tell people what you believe, tell people what your governing principles and philosophy is. Tell them what you'll do when you're elected. Then if you get elected, do that. If you don't like the direction things are going, don't just criticize, offer solutions. I take that very seriously. Number 2, be accessible. Be there for people. I live here in Janesville, always have. I sleep on a cot in my office because I work until I fall asleep late into the evening, working for the hardworking taxpayers here as I commute back and forth every week. My wife Jen and I live here with our 3 kids who go to school here in town. What I think is important is that you listen to people. That's why I've held over 600 town hall sessions, listening sessions. That's why I have all these advisory boards, from farmers to dental workers to healthcare workers to teachers to first responders to small businesses to healthcare and everything in between. Number 3, help people. What do I mean when I say that? I talked to a daughter of a veteran on Saturday. He has a lot of problems. This is something we work on. I've actually specifically intervened and helped over 62,000 people with specific problems they have in their lives and their interaction with the federal government. Over 8,000 in just the last 2 years. We take great pride in doing this. We've gotten really good at it. I feel I've become much better at this job. I think public service is a wonderful vocation because you can make a big difference in certain people's lives, such as helping them with a particular problem, or you can take an idea, advocate for it, move it through the legislative process, see it take place, and see it make a positive difference in people's lives. That's what I think is important about this job, and that's why I want to thank the hardworking taxpayers who gave me this job in the first place. Thank you.
Thank you, Congressman Ryan. And Mr. Zerban, your opening remarks.
Well, thank you. And thank you all so much for being here tonight. And Congressman Ryan, it's good to see you again. I really appreciate you being here, and I appreciate the opportunity to have this debate. It's an opportunity for the candidates to stand up on stage and talk about the issues and where they stand on these issues, what their positions are. And, you know, it's also an opportunity for us to demonstrate to the rest of the country that even though Congressman Ryan and I disagree sharply on policy, we are not disagreeable. You know, I would characterize our relationship as very cordial. We see each other, we say hi, we have decent conversations. We don't go out to dinner together, but we have had the pleasure at the Racine County Fair of milking goats together.
That's right.
So, you know, once you've milked a goat with a guy, it's not breaking bread, but it's pretty close. And I wish that the rest of the country could learn from the example that we set here at these debates and the kind of campaigns that we run. I would say that we have very different approaches, and sometimes we offer sharp criticism of each other with those positions, and that's what it's about. Now, I would say that our positions have been shaped and formed by our lives, our professions as adults. My background is such that I was a small business owner, an entrepreneur who started 2 companies, somebody who employed dozens of people, providing excellent wages and benefits. Had to be a problem solver. And I'd like to take that experience to the U.S. Congress. Now, I would characterize Congressman Ryan as a career politician. Somebody who graduated from college, has worked in Washington, D.C. his entire life, either working for a politician or being one himself. As a business owner, I had to deal with some of the dysfunction that came out of D.C., whether it be not finding a solution to health care when I had my companies, or whatever the reason is. And I would argue that the partisanship and what's been happening in D.C. has caused a lot of problems, not just for us in our homes, but also for small business owners like I was. And I'd like to take my perspective to Washington, D.C. and try and find solutions to those problems. And I would like your support to get there. So I hope you enjoy the debates tonight and keep an open mind, and hopefully you'll get some clarity on our positions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Zerban. We will begin our line of questioning as we're gathered today on a college campus with a question regarding higher education issues. With student debt threatening to become a drag on the economy and the cost of higher education becoming a barrier for many, what specifically needs to be done to bring education costs, both the initial tuition and housing costs and the financing costs to students post-graduation, what needs to be done to bring those in line with the average salaries being paid upon graduation, thus making education once again a part of a path to success in America? Mr. Zerban, you'll go first.
Great question. I'm a perfect example of a person who understands how important a higher education what a difference it can make in your life. And I understand all too well why it needs to be affordable. I grew up in a very impoverished home, and because of Pell Grants and Stafford loans, I was able to get that education, and it was life-altering for me. I was able to go on and become very successful. My wife and I had 2 very different experiences. I was, had to get Pell Grants and Stafford loans. My wife immigrated here from Germany and got her doctorate, and didn't have one student loan coming from Germany because they provide education all the way through college. And when she came here to finish her doctorate, had to borrow $100,000 to finish her doctorate. Now, if a country that is 1/3 of the size of the United States GDP can provide an education through college, we can do it here too. And I think we need to. We need to make an investment in future generations of Americans, because if we don't, we're not only selling them short, we're selling America's future short. We have saddled young adults with over $1 trillion worth of debt. And at the same time, we said, you need to borrow money to get an education, you need to pay a higher interest loan than Wall Street banks get. They pay 0.75%, and student loans now I think are about 6%. And Congressman Ryan has supported legislation where that interest, you would be responsible for it from day one. When I got out of school and I had to pay back my loans, that's when the interest started accruing, and I think back then they were about 5%. So we need a comprehensive solution, and we need people to work together to make sure that we can do that, because I know that there's a better way. Countries around the world do it. Thank you.
Thank you. And Congressman Ryan.
Well, it's just no secret the bridge to a better life is a good job, and the way you get a good job is to get a decent education. Here's our problem. More and more kids are coming out of school with more and more debt, and they're not getting the kinds of jobs they need, that they should get from their training to pay off that debt. Rob was right. We have over $1 trillion in outstanding student loan debt today. The federal government, I think, is a part of this problem. I think the federal government, in many ways, is actually facilitating tuition inflation. We put over 100% increase in funding over the last decade has come from Washington and the federal education system, and tuition inflation, partly as a result, has gone up 5.2% above and beyond inflation. The government nationalized the student loan industry as part of the Affordable Care Act. I got my loans from Great Lakes Higher Education up in Madison. I worked 3 jobs after college to pay back those loans. Waited tables, worked at a gym, worked on a committee. You know, what I learned was if you can actually, get a good loan, get a decent education, you can make a bigger difference in your life. That what kids are learning today is borrow, 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 and then in a slow economy we have today, they're not getting those kinds of jobs. So we have to go at the root cause of tuition inflation. I put out some proposals on that just this last July. We need to bring more transparency. What kind of education do you get from this tuition? What's the placement rate in the jobs? We don't even have those kinds of metrics. And the one thing I learned growing up, living here in Janesville, a friend of mine, just my neighbor, lost his job at Lear. A lot of our friends lost their jobs at the plant. Skills. This is why I worked to co-author the Skills Act, consolidating 49 different job training programs spread across 9 different government agencies into a more flexible program to go to the person so that they can get the resources they need to get the job they want, to go to Black Hawk Tech, to go to UROC, to go to wherever they want to go. That was the most path-breaking job training legislation we've passed in decades, and I was proud to be a part of that because of the lessons I learned living here in Janesville.
Thank you, Congressman Ryan. Gentlemen, a September Gallup poll shows a disconnect in what I'll call party talking points and what Americans are genuinely concerned about. For instance, the hot-button issues of gay rights, gun control, or welfare garnered only 1% of the response each. Wage issues got a 2% response, and the income gap a 3% response in the latest Gallup poll. Topping the list of concerns among Americans, being mentioned 18% of the time, was dissatisfaction with the government. Please explain to the voters of the 1st Congressional District why they would be more satisfied with you than with your opponent. Congressman Ryan, you'll go first.
Well, I'm not in the majority party, and I think we are living under the majority party's policies, and I think those policies are producing horrible results. We have big government in practice right now. We have incompetent government in practice right now. You can just think about Ebola, or you can think about the website crashing on Obamacare, or you can look at the fact that we have 92.5 million Americans, able-bodied adults, who aren't working, who aren't even being caught in the statistics. The problem is when you make government so big, when you have no limiting principle, government does everything poorly. What we should have is a limited government that does what it's supposed to do effectively. That's been what I've been focusing on all my time in Congress. I want Medicare to be solvent and secure, not only for this generation, but for the next generation. I want affordable health care so that it's not breaking the bank and not telling us who and where we have to go to get our health care. We want to have an economy where we have fast enough economic growth that everybody can get a good job. We want to have a federal government that is doing what it's supposed to do. And right now, we have a federal government that's spreading itself so thin that it doesn't do anything very well. To me, what it really matters is get the government to do its job effectively. Are we balancing the budget or not? No, we're not. Do we have a strong military that is addressing our threats? I don't think it's going in the right direction. Are we addressing the critical components of how do we fight disease? Are we making sure that we have the job training programs that get the benefits to the people who need to get the skills? Or are we adding more and more to the pile? We have 92 different federal poverty programs spending $800 million a year, and we have the highest poverty rates in a generation, 45 million people in poverty. We just had more program after program after program instead of deciding whether they're worth it or not. The goal of government, as I try to say, is focus on outcomes, results. Are we actually getting the job done, not on inputs? How much money are we spending? How many programs are we creating? That, in my opinion, is the failed approach that we have right now, and that is what I've been trying to reform.
Thank you, Congressman. And Mr. Zerban.
I would argue that people are dissatisfied with their government because they're tired of seeing their government not do the people's business. They're tired of seeing the partisanship. That's why Congress's approval rating is an abysmal 13% or 9%, depending upon what day it is, and what they're doing. Now, in business, and I think it should be the same, apply equally, is that you're either part of the solution or you're part of the problem. And I would argue that Congressman Ryan has been very partisan in his time in D.C. and has been part of the problem and created some of the dysfunction that the rest of us have to deal with when our government doesn't work for us. So, you know, I think that the Democrats have been better leaders in this respect, because if you take a look at some of the most groundbreaking legislation we've passed in the past 40 years was the Affordable Care Act, comprehensively addressing the healthcare crisis that's going on in this nation. Did it solve every problem? No. But it's gone a long way in addressing the problems we're faced with. And the way I see it is that the Democrats had actually taken the best parts of Paul Ryan's running mate, Mitt Romney's plan from Massachusetts, and improved upon that health care plan. They incorporated an idea from the Heritage Foundation, which is called the individual mandate. So, you know, I've always said that good ideas do not come with a party label. You take the best from what everybody has to offer, incorporate them, and then address the problems that we need to have solved. And that's the approach that I would take. And I don't think there's been enough of that kind of an attitude in Washington, D.C., and that's why I'd like to go there and try to do that. Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen. Let us turn our attention to Social Security and Medicare issues. A 2010 Social Security Administration bulletin indicated that the trust fund reserves will become exhausted in 2037. After that time, incoming taxes are expected to cover 76% of the benefits. Meanwhile, Medicare spending is expected to jump from $508 billion this year to $915 billion in 2023. I will likely be eligible for Medicare 7 years after the spending hits that $915 mark, and I'll have 7 years to go before expecting a Social Security check. Gentlemen, should I expect to see either benefit, and if so, how does America pay for them? Mr. Zerban, you'll go first.
Yes, you should expect to see your check. Social Security is so important to so many Americans. It was created for the common good of the common person, to help keep senior citizens out of poverty after they retire. And it's worked extremely well. As things have changed, companies have gotten away from defined benefits. More and more people have relied upon Social Security for having a standard of living in their retirement age. So we need to make sure that it is solvent. And there are a couple things we can do that are common sense solutions. One of the things we can do is raise the cap on incomes above $113,000. This, to me, is just simple tax fairness. I've never understood why somebody who's earning more than $113,000 should pay less into Social Security than somebody who's earning under $113,000. And this, just scrapping the cap, gets us about 80% of the way there. There are other things that we can do. We can adjust the contribution that people are contributing to Social Security. You know, I know that Congressman Ryan has proposed putting a portion of it into the stock market. Well, I don't think that's a good idea, in that we saw what happened with the Great Recession and how many people got hurt in the stock market. Can you imagine if your retirement savings were in there and you were very dependent upon Social Security, and that was in there as well? You know, Social Security was considered one of the three legs of retirement. You had your personal savings, you had the 401k or defined benefit that you got from your company, and then you had Social Security. Well, when you take the defined pension away, and if you don't have the ability to save, because we've seen wages stay flat, more and more people rely on Social Security. And we can keep those promises, and we must keep those promises without raising the eligibility age or reducing the benefits. And you can do it. It's a matter of priorities, and DC has to get their priorities straight. And take care of seniors better be one of them.
How old are you again, Tim?
You can do the math.
I'm just kidding. These are the two most important programs, I think, that the federal government offers. When my dad died when I was 16 here in Janesville, Social Security helped me pay for college, helped my family at a very difficult time in our lives. Medicare was there for my grandma as it is now for my mom. Here's the issue. It's a demographics thing. They're both going bankrupt. Can they be fixed? Yes. Will they be fixed? Yeah, I believe they will. I believe that there is an emerging consensus, which I think I've been a party to fixing these problems. Here's the issue. You are going from 40 million retirees to about 77 million retirees, and far fewer people are following them into the workforce. And so this pay-as-you-go program where we pay our current taxes for current retirees is one of the reasons why it's going bankrupt. 23% across the board in 2033 for Social Security right there if nothing's done. I think if you raise a tax cap like that, it's a huge tax on the self-insured, the self-employed person, like a farmer. So I think that that's probably the wrong way to go. But I've offered very specific legislation to shoring up Social Security so no change occurs whatsoever to anyone in or near retirement. But give those of us who are younger an opportunity to get a better rate of return. My kids are looking at about a negative 1% rate of return on their FICA taxes over their working lives if Social Security could pay them their money. Why not giving them the ability, like federal employees and members of Congress have, of getting a better rate of return with a thrift savings plan just like the federal government has for its workers? Medicare. I've co-authored 2 bipartisan solutions, one with the Clinton Budget Director Alice Rivlin, one with the current Democratic chair of the Finance Committee, Ron Wyden, a senator from Oregon. These bills, according to the Congressional Budget Office, save money for seniors, save money for the government, for the taxpayer, and make Medicare solvent. Medicare is going bankrupt. It's a very important program. And the sooner we act on these problems, the better off we are. My whole point is don't point fingers, put out solutions, tackle the problems before they tackle us.
Thank you, Congressman. Gentlemen, this next question might simply ask, who is actually experiencing the benefits of our economic recovery? The sad reality is that millions of Americans have not had a pay increase in years. Many who lost jobs went back to work at substantially lower paying jobs, and many have given up exiting the workforce altogether. Meanwhile, if you're in the stock market, until last week anyway, your bank account bulged as a result of corporate profits averaging 20%. What will it take and what will you do to ensure that a continued recovery is better shared by all Americans instead of just those at the top? Congressman Ryan, your views.
100%, 100% agree with that. To answer your question is who is benefiting from this economy are the people at the very top, which is Wall Street. Why is that? Guess what? We're practicing trickle-down economics right now. The economics of this administration, more regulations that cost jobs and strangle small businesses, higher tax rates that put our small business manufacturers at a competitive disadvantage from our foreign competitors, and the Federal Reserve pumping trillions of dollars into the stock market to create what they call a wealth effect, is giving people with lots of money more money, but that growth is not translating down to the middle class. It's not lifting people out of poverty when we have among the highest poverty rates in a generation. This is what we're practicing right now. These are the products of these economic policies that the President and his administration has put into place. More regulations, higher taxes, loose money from the Federal Reserve to pump up the stock market. We should go in the opposite direction. Let's have regulations that make sense, that are predictable. Remove the big word that I hear around this district from all the employers and the people who want to employ people, uncertainty. The biggest uncertainty they get right now is coming from the government. Let's have a tax code that is fair and simple and stops picking winners and losers and lowers tax rates on all of our producers, all of our job creators, so that they can be competitive in the global economy. Let's balance the budget and pay off the debt so we don't have an interest rate and inflation problem later on. Let's streamline our regulations so that businesses can hire people, so that people can get more take-home pay. Real median income is down 8% in this country since the recession. We should be springing out of this recession. This is the worst economic recovery since World War II. And I would argue the reason is because of government. So number one, don't do what we're doing now. Go in a different direction. 381 bills we passed out of the House of Representatives dealing with all of these issues, sitting in the Senate, going nowhere. We want to break that logjam, put these bills on the President's desk, and make a difference.
Thank you, Congressman. And Mr. Zerban, your position.
Well, I think the best thing we can do for our economy is get back to full employment as quickly as possible. We have gone a long way from 10% unemployment at the height of the recession to just below 6% at 5.9, but we need to keep that trend going. And I think one of the great ways we can do that is by investing in our infrastructure here and all across the country, both with public and private investment. Now, these have got to be good paying jobs, of course, and we need to raise the minimum wage to make sure that everybody who's working 40 hours a week is earning above a poverty wage. So, what we can't afford to do is follow an austerity budget and have more bad trade deals that have cost jobs across this country. There's the Trans-Pacific Partnership that's out there lurking in the woods that we need to be very careful of. These these bad trade deals, and I don't want to sound like I'm anti-trade, I'm very much for trade. That's how we grow our economy. But we need to have fair trade deals and not free trade deals that put American workers at a disadvantage by not ensuring that countries that we're trading with have unfair labor standards or no labor standards whatsoever, that they don't have they're not paying a decent wage, and they don't have environmental regulations that we abide by here in the United States. Because I'm convinced if you put the American worker on a level playing field, we'll win every time. But they have to have that opportunity. See, government writes the rules for which business conducts itself. And if you loosen those rules and allow things like that to happen, well, then the workers get hurt. And we have to grow our economy by building the middle class outward, not top down. And I think that there are better policies than free trade deals that we can pursue to make sure that that happens.
Thank you. Gentlemen, in 2013, a comprehensive and largely bipartisan bill was passed in the Senate to overhaul our immigration system. The House of Representatives chose not to take up this bill, I believe, with the basic reasoning that it was better to deal with the aspects on a more individual basis. Since then, some 60,000 children have come across our southern border, along with thousands of adults, and the risks of terrorism and disease coming over that same border seem significant. At the same time, the President seems poised to offer legal employment status to 1 million or more people in the United States currently illegally. What steps will you take to assure security at America's borders? And how would you bring to a resolution the illegal status of nearly 12 million people currently estimated to be living in the U.S.? Mr. Zerban?
Right. The democratically controlled Senate passed, with bipartisan support, with an overwhelming majority, comprehensive immigration reform, Senate Bill 744. I personally would have supported that bill. I didn't agree with every provision that was in it, but it comprehensively addressed those who were here illegally. It addressed future immigrants. It gave people a meaningful path to citizenship. And there are millions of people in this country, millions of families who are looking for a solution, because we know what we have right now is not working. Certainly, we need to stem the flow of immigration illegally across the border, however possible, whenever possible. And this bill addressed that. Now, Congressman Ryan's going to tell you the House of Representatives didn't take it up because it was too big of a bill. It just was too many pages. Nobody knows what they're passing when they have a big bill like this. Well, I've seen a Republican-controlled House of Representatives pass Medicare Part D. I've seen them pass CAFTA. These are very complex. This is very complex legislation, many pages. And I can guarantee you that if the immigration reform bill would have had handouts for big pharma or special interests or somebody else like this, they would have passed it post-haste. But because nobody was going to profit from it, they didn't take it up and didn't pass it. I guess there's just not enough profit built into immigration reform for the House Republicans and leadership to do something about it. Well, we all wait for a solution, and we had one. And that's failed leadership it lays right at the feet of the House Republicans, the majority in the House. They did absolutely nothing.
Congressman Ryan.
Let me start off by saying immigration is very important for this country. This country is built upon immigration. And my family came from Ireland to this town, like a lot of Janesville families did. That is the American idea. It's a beautiful idea. The condition of your birth doesn't determine the outcome of your life. So we want a good, healthy, working immigration system. We want an immigration system that is governed by the rule of law. We want an immigration system where in this 21st century society, where we have viruses, heroin coming into our schools right here in Janesville, drugs, crime, we want to be able to patrol our borders, ISIS. So we want to have a system where we can control who's coming and going in this country. We want to have a system where the economy gets the workers it needs and where people who want to come and make a better life for themselves have the ability to do that legally. That's good. What I didn't like about the Senate bill is I believe it rewarded people for cutting in line in front of that legal immigrant who did everything right, who worked hard, who played by the rules, who paid their fines, who waited in line and came here legally. I don't want to reward a person for cutting in front of them. That's the person that ought to be rewarded, the person who did it right. Now, how do we deal with the fact that we have, I don't know, 11, 12 million undocumented immigrants in this country? We got to do a law. You shouldn't do executive action. I've told the president this a number of times. I've talked to his people. If the president, to your specific question, Tim, tries to do another executive order, he will encourage more people to come over the border very quickly, which is one of the reasons why we had this problem. You have to go through Congress. In the House, we've offered many solutions. And yes, I don't like passing multi-thousand-page bills where most people don't even know what they're voting for. I would do a probationary process for undocumented immigrants that does not involve amnesty, that gives them the ability to earn legal status. Not getting them a foothold in front of the line, not getting them a special pathway to citizenship, but earning legal status so that 10 years from now, we're not here with the same problem again.
Thank you. This next question is in regards to health care. And while it is simply impossible to go into the complexities of the Affordable Care Act here, let me cite just a few facts. A recent study by the National Health Interview Survey indicates that 41 million Americans still do not have health insurance. Yet, several million more Americans are insured now than when the law took effect, including some young people under the age of 26 now able to stay on their parents' insurance, and some with pre-existing conditions that were able to regain insurability. With the goal of providing affordable health care to all Americans, is our progress at this stage of implementation acceptable, and what needs to change, if anything, to meet the law's ultimate goal? Congressman Ryan?
Well, first of all, I think if you don't like the way things are going or the laws on the books, you propose solutions. I've done that specifically in this area. I was one of the co-authors of the most comprehensive alternative to Obamacare when Obamacare was being debated. I have since put those ideas out there as well. Here's the quick point I would make. You can have a system in America where everybody, including people with pre-existing conditions, can get affordable health care, can get affordable insurance without this costly government takeover. And what did we do? This costly government takeover, taking over 16% of our economy, and at the end of the day, according to the Congressional Budget Office, we're still going to have 30 million people uninsured. What we should have done was fix what was broken in healthcare instead of breaking what was working in healthcare. Millions of people are losing the insurance that they liked having. Millions of employers are now knocking their people down out of the 40-hour work week. People right here in Janesville getting knocked down to 29 hours because of this. We could have done a far better job. And so what I would do, first of all, there was a Republican alternative when this was being debated. And it said 26 and below. We agree with that position. It had an answer for people with pre-existing conditions. You can tackle these problems without having the government take it over. With a patient-centered healthcare system, we spend more than 2.5 times per person on healthcare in America than any other industrialized country in the world. We should run the money through the person. More money should go to the poor and the sick than for the wealthy. And we should do it in a system where the providers, Mercy, Dean, all the insurers, nursing homes, they compete against each other for our business and our benefit as patients, as consumers. That's what a patient-centered healthcare system looks like. That's not what Obamacare is. Obamacare is government-run. Obamacare puts a board of bureaucrats in charge of cutting Medicare that will lead to denied care for seniors. And Obamacare takes $716 billion from Medicare to spend on Obamacare, depriving those seniors of those needed services that they're going to need. I think we should undo it, and I think we should replace it with patient-centered health care.
And Mr. Zerban?
Well, we know you think it should be undone. 50 votes to repeal it is very telling of your position. We got it after the first 10. You didn't need to go to 50, but okay. Look, we could not be farther apart on this issue. I am a person who supports Medicare for all. If you look at the countries that pay half as much as we do with better outcomes, every one of them has a single-payer system like Medicare for all. Medicare is the most efficient. It works best. We could switch to a single-payer system like Medicare for all, have everybody covered, and have better coverages. It's that simple. All the advanced societies of Northern Europe, first world countries, that's what they do. That's why they pay less. Congressman Ryan here doesn't want to go in that direction, and a lot of Republicans don't want to go that direction because most of the time, these people have taken millions of dollars from the healthcare sector. Congressman Ryan himself has benefited from this. And that's why they advocate for keeping the status quo, going back to having pre-existing conditions, having caps on what companies have to pay out. I approach this from a businessman's perspective. With $1 million payroll, I paid $120,000 a year into health insurance because I provided the best health insurance there was, and I saw my rates going up 10, 12, 18%. And the reason I support Medicare for All is because I know by adjusting that contribution a little bit, that 2.9% that we both pay into as an employee and an employer, we get a lot more for our money, and we get everybody covered. And big businesses understood this. This is why Walmart was in favor of single payer. That's why they supported it, because they knew it would be a cost savings to them. And they knew that they would have everybody covered. And then that health insurance company and the healthcare companies would stop cannibalizing their profits. And that's why healthcare is against changing anything that works better for you. Look who's advocating to protect profits or to protect people. I haven't received one dime from healthcare corporations.
Gentlemen, in the last 12 months, the U.S. has found itself amongst an almost unprecedented number of international crises. There was the Russian annexation of Crimea. There was the Syrian chemical weapons resolution. There was the ongoing Russian-Ukraine conflict, the Iran nuclear weapons concerns, the Ebola outbreak, the response to ISIS thus far, the weakening of the U.S. dollar, and I could probably go on. One could argue our effectiveness in each of those situations. My question, is America still the most powerful nation in the world? And if so, why such a long list of unresolved international issues? We will begin with Mr. Zerban.
There are lots of conflicts around the world, lots of issues that we need to be addressed, and America is the largest superpower, the largest economy, largest military, the last, I would say, superpower. The world looks to us for leadership, and how we define that leadership is through our actions. And if we build broad coalitions with our allies in a region or around the world to address things as serious as climate change or humanitarian crisis or conflict in a region like the Middle East, we need to work together with our allies to address this. Why some of these things have not been addressed is the situations change quite rapidly. I mean, you know, what you hear about today is different tomorrow with, you know, particularly like Ebola or ISIS or ISIL. That's why it takes a little bit more effort and coordination when things are changing so quickly. And we do that best when we do build those coalitions and we act as a leader by bringing everybody to the table who can bear some sort of influence in correcting that situation. I think we've done an extremely good job at containing Ebola within our borders after it came to Dallas. I think they've got a handle on it, and I'm not concerned that it's going to spread to some full-fledged outbreak like we've seen in Africa. I have that confidence in our government. These are the things we can do if you have an adequately funded government. We've heard about, and I applaud the director from the NIH saying, look, we might have had a vaccine for Ebola if our funding hadn't been cut. It's the same with first responders in the district. You know, I have a lot of friends who are firemen who complain that, you know, they don't get the money they need through the SAFER grants anymore because of sequestration. In SAFER grants, it stands for Staffing Adequately Fire and Emergency Response. And these are our first responders should we have something like an Ebola outbreak. And we need to make sure that they have what they need to do their job.
Thank you. Congressman Ryan.
The federal government can't even run a website. Imagine what it would be like if we put them in charge of all of our health care. I digress. Let me walk through the issues quickly. Russia. President Obama takes missile defense off the table, undercutting our allies in the Czech Republic and Poland. And we caught that moment in the hot mic moment where he told Putin he'd do it after the election. Then he does the New START treaty, giving them basically what they wanted from our missiles and not having to do anything for themselves, meaning we brought our missiles down to where they were. Then on the week that Vladimir Putin invades Crimea, President Obama sends Congress a budget that proposes to take the Army down to the lowest level we've seen since before World War II, to shrink our Navy down to a level we haven't seen since before World War I, and to shrink our Air Force down to a level we've never seen before. He starts negotiations with Iran, whose mission is clearly stated the destruction of Israel, that he stops sanctions while he's doing these negotiations, which now are dwindling on. So he takes the pressure off and elongates the negotiations. ISIS. He declares a red line in Syria, then doesn't enforce the red line, then doesn't support the moderates in Syria who people in his own administration ask him to, and ISIS is created. Oh, and then he walks away from Iraq after the military asked him for a status as a forces agreement. He doesn't do that, which disintegrates the Iraqi army, and ISIS goes there as well. Leadership. We don't have the kind of leadership we need. When you shrink your military like this, when you make these decisions internationally, where the world sees us retreating, we look weak. And if we look weak, a vacuum is created, and if a vacuum is created, it is filled by people who do not share our values. This is why you need to reverse these kinds of decisions and have strong leadership and have a strong military.
Thank you, gentlemen. Next, we'll turn to the national debt. In 1980, the nation's debt stood at just under $1 trillion and was about 32% of the nation's GDP. Since that time, Democratic and Republican Congresses and presidents have been at watch as our debt grew every single year and our debt to GDP ratio climbed steadily until we now find ourselves with nearly $18 trillion in debt, a figure that pretty much equals our entire gross domestic product. In your educated opinion, how long before the proverbial bottom falls out? What should Americans be preparing for if this trend continues? And what do you suggest is our best course of action? We'll begin with Congressman Ryan.
Well, again, don't just criticize proposed solutions. For the last 4 years in a row, I have written and passed a budget through the House of Representatives. No small task, balancing the budget and paying off this debt. And I've shown specifically how to do it. Go to my website if you want, housebudgetcommittee.com, and download the Path to Prosperity. Not everybody's going to like everything in it. It was a consensus-building document, working with hundreds of members of Congress to find ideas to get this debt paid off. $5.1 trillion in less spending over the next 10 years to balance the budget and pay off the debt, and do it in a way that phases in these reforms. So, for instance, Medicare. No change for anyone in or near retirement, but you have to reform these programs for the next generation if we can keep cash flowing the commitment to the current generation and give the next generation time to prepare for a solvent system. If you start now, then this becomes pretty easy. If you wait and you kick the can down the road, then it gets really ugly. What do I mean when I say that? Well, starting in 2018, according to the Congressional Budget Office, our deficits start going right back up again, back to trillion-dollar territory and never coming down. Here's the other problem. The Federal Reserve isn't going to keep interest rates low for much longer. Once those interest rates start rising, our payments on interest on the debt really start growing, trillions of dollars. What I worry about is a European-like situation. What happened in Europe? The bond markets caught up with them. They had a debt crisis. What happens in a debt crisis? You're in crisis emergency management. That means they were cutting people who are already retired, breaking government's promises to retirees, cutting the social safety net, and going into recession. That's the kind of budget emergency you do when a debt crisis has hit. If there's anything that I have done since working for you in this job, it is to try and prevent that from happening. And if you prevent it from happening, you give businesses more certainty, you create jobs, you go in a different direction. I've put this specific plan out there. I'm the only one who's written it and passed it in Congress. I feel so strongly about this because I want to give the next generation a better future, and right now we're not.
Thank you, Congressman. Mr. Zerban?
Thanks for letting me know Europe's going bankrupt. I have to make sure my mother-in-law knows that her retirement's in jeopardy, and she's living quite nicely. Look, their unemployment's below 4% in Germany, and their economy's humming along. But you know what? What we need to do to get to pare down our debt is we need a balanced budget, first of all. We need a balanced approach to get that. And that requires having some increased revenue and cost savings. And you know what? Increased revenue doesn't mean you're going to hike up taxes on anybody. What it means is you can close loopholes for corporations. There's $182 billion a year that we lose. You can get rid of the tax havens that people are taking advantage of. There's $150 billion a year. Subsidies for oil and gas companies every year, $50 billion. Anybody here have tax havens or have these corporate loopholes you're taking advantage of that are costing us so much money? Well, right there, that's $382 billion. Our budget shortfall this year, $486 billion. And that's just looking at 3 areas. So we can do this. We have come a long way. We've come down from 9.8% to GDP deficit spending to down to less than 2.9%, which is lower than the 40-year historical average. So we are on the right track. The economy is improving, and America can do this without forcing an unwanted austerity, without cutting the benefits to senior citizens, without changing Medicare into something they don't recognize, call it a voucher, a coupon, or premium support. We don't need a Ryan budget to get out of debt. His budget calls for the federal government to be half the size that it is today. You think we can't adequately address the problems of Ebola and crisis around the world? Just wait till you get his budget and the federal government's half the size. That's what we can't afford to do. What we do need to do is continue to grow the middle class, get our economy humming along, get everybody back to full employment, and address the debt when it's appropriate. Thank you.
Gentlemen, voters in the 1st District are pretty clear in their minds as to what their biggest concerns are. Now, candidates, here is your chance to tell the voters, if elected, what are your top 3 priorities, and what will you do to ensure those priorities advance through both houses, regardless of who controls them after November 4th. We'll begin with Mr. Zerban.
Thank you. My priorities are jobs and the economy, getting people back to work here in the 1st District. Wherever I go, whether I'm in Janesville, Racine, or Kenosha, or anywhere in between, it's always, where are the good-paying jobs? We know the economy's recovering, but they're still feeling the pinch. So that's, first priority. Another thing that I think we need to do is we actually need to get money out of politics. Anytime this comes up for a vote in the 1st Congressional District, be it Waukesha or Walworth, Republican, Democrats, everybody supports getting the horrible influence of money out of our political process. I think that that's a priority because once we do that, then legislators can actually start to focus on what they need to be doing, which is addressing the problems that our country is faced with. Right now, so many legislators spend so much time trying to raise the money they need for re-election. It's quite sad that this is what our democracy has come to, is whoever can raise the most money. We send back 90% of our incumbents, and incumbents get favored 10 to 1 with respect to the amount of money that they can raise. So, once we do that, we can start to focus on the problems of the nation. Protecting Medicare, Social Security, and Medicaid. These programs are so vital to Americans, senior citizens, poor people. We can't afford to fundamentally change it into a program that doesn't do what it's designed to do. Medicare, if it becomes a voucher program, it doesn't do anything to address the costs of health care in this nation. It just actually asks senior citizens to pay more. It puts more onto the backs of the senior citizens who can least afford it. Medicaid, it's so important that I think upwards of 70% of people who are on Medicaid are senior citizens because they don't have enough. So those would be my priorities should you send me to Congress. And I would do everything I possibly could. I know how difficult it is sometimes to get anything done in D.C., but that's why compromise is important. That's why I would have supported the Senate bill. Even though I didn't agree with everything in it, I would have supported it.
Thank you. And Congressman Ryan, your response.
Jobs. Hardworking taxpayers, they're working harder and harder, yet falling further and further behind. So my overall emphasis would be to help produce faster economic growth so people who are at work can get work, and people who are struggling and not getting a raise can get more take-home pay. Okay, what do I do to do that? 3 things, because you said 3. Tax reform. I think it's really important that we actually reform our outdated tax system. Overseas, which where we come from, means Lake Superior. The Canadians, they're taxing all of their businesses at 15%. The Brits are going to 20%, China 25%, Ireland 12.5%. The international average tax rate on businesses in the world among industrialized nations is 25%. Our biggest corporations are at 35%, and the highest individual tax rate, which is what 9 out of 10 businesses pay their taxes in Wisconsin as individuals, that's as high as 44.6%. So we're taxing our job creators anywhere from 35 to 45%, while our competitors are at 25%. We've got to tax our rates. I want to plug all those loopholes and lower tax rates. Stop picking winners and losers, lower tax rates. Second, we need to get another budget agreement. I co-authored with a Democrat, the chair of the Budget Committee, my counterpart, Patty Murray, the first bipartisan budget agreement in a divided Congress since 1986. It's a 2-year agreement that expires this coming year. I want to do that again so that we can have some certainty, so that we can have a highway trust fund that's funded, so that we can have planning, so that the Congress can actually retain the power of the purse and go back to making this government work and holding it accountable. Third, poverty. This is an area I've spent a great deal of time in. I put out a very comprehensive plan for opportunity. Too many people are slipping through the cracks. There are too many things that need to be done to get people from welfare to work so they can get back onto a path to a better life. There are a number of these reforms that the president agrees with some of these. I think there's an area of bipartisan support to make a difference on poverty, and this is something that I'm going to strive for.
Thank you, Congressman. That concludes our line of questioning this evening between Congressman Paul Ryan and Rob Zerban in the race for the 1st Congressional District. We will now have the closing statements from our candidates, 3 minutes each, and since Congressman Ryan went first in the opening statements, we'll have Mr. Zerban go first in the closing statements. Mr. Zerban, your closing remarks.
Thank you, and thank you all so much for being here. I hope that you were given some insight or found what it was that you came here seeking tonight. Again, it's a wonderful pleasure to be here in front of you all and talk about the issues that are important to so many of us. Now, Congressman Ryan has talked about being a leader in proposing budgets, but we know from the 2012 campaign and the scrutiny that that budget received that the numbers just don't add up, and that's not a solution. Proposing and passing a budget that calls for the federal government to be half the size that it is today doesn't solve our problems. Eliminating funding for programs that people need doesn't eliminate the need for that program. It simply pushes women, children, and senior citizens out in the cold, hungry, and without shelter. And that's immoral. Look, we want DC to be responsible with our taxes. We can all agree on that. We also have to understand that being responsible means more than just lowering them. It means that once you have them, that you hold on to them and you act responsibly with them. And that means not voting for a government shutdown that costs us $24 billion. That means not writing a budget that contains $50 billion annually for profitable oil and gas companies. These are industries that don't need our tax dollars to survive. Banks. Banks got bailed out, the average Joe got sold out. And that's a shame. And they did so being aided and abetted by the U.S. Congress through repealing Glass-Steagall. Glass-Steagall was a law that was designed to avoid exactly what happened. It was designed to keep banks from gambling with your retirement, your savings, your mortgage, our economy. They did that, they lost, and ruined a worldwide economy, ruined millions of lives, put millions of people out of work. We cannot afford to let that happen again. I think we need to send people to Washington, D.C. who are willing to work for the working families of hard-paying taxpayers here in Wisconsin and all around this country. We don't need another politician who's going there to protect profits of corporations. Congressman Ryan has received millions of dollars from healthcare corporations, millions of dollars from the financial sector. So when you cast that ballot this November, I want you to think about who has your best interest in mind. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Zerban. And Congressman Ryan, your 3-minute closing statement.
First of all, I want to thank UROC again and CLO and the Gazette for hosting us, and for you as well, Tim. I feel like I've gotten better at this job. I don't have this endless confidence in the ability of the federal government to do all things to all people. I don't look at problems as solutions only with more spending of your hardworking money. I think hardworking taxpayers are not getting the government they deserve. They're not being respected. And I think there's a lot of problems in the federal government that need fixing. I think there are millions of people in this country who are not getting the opportunities they need to build a better life for themselves. I see an economy with 92 million people who are able-bodied, who aren't in the workforce. I see a problem. And I don't think more and more spending and borrowing and taxing and taking and regulating is the solution. Now, here's the point. I want to offer solutions. And that's exactly what I've been doing. Let me tell you what I'm trying to do and why I'm trying to do it. What I'm trying to do is, if I don't think the direction the country's headed is the right direction, which on a whole host of these issues I don't, then I feel I owe you, my employer, alternatives. How we would do things differently. What are better ideas? On energy, on education, on poverty, on budget, on health care, on economic growth, on job training, on taxes. I've offered all those solutions. Some of them I've already been able to pass in this divided government. Why am I doing this? Look, I'm born and raised here in this town, like probably most of the people here in the audience. It's a great place. The condition of your birth, it doesn't determine the outcome of your life in this country. It doesn't matter who you are or where you come from, you can make it in this country. We believe in a system of natural rights and equality of opportunity so that we can make the most of our lives. Government has a very important role to play in our lives, but not the dominating role. See, the philosophy I have, and we have different philosophies, the philosophy I have is of an American life that is society-centered based on collaboration, where we work together to make a better life. And yes, make sure that government does what it's supposed to do and does it well. That's different than a government-centered vision of American life based on coercion. Different outcomes. We've tested those ideas in different countries, and I don't think they work as well as the American idea. Now, how do you measure success? Again, this is something that I see differently. I don't measure success by inputs. I don't measure success by effort. How much money are we spending? How many programs are we creating? How many people are going on these programs? I measure success by results. How many people are we getting out of poverty? How many people are actually getting good jobs and getting on with their life? Are we more peaceful and stronger in the world or less? That's how I measure success. So we can have all this blind faith we want, take more money from you, take more money from taxpayers, take more money from the next generation and spend it and think we're doing really well, but let's measure success based on whether it worked or not. That's how I measure success, and that's why I'm thankful for having this job, and I want to thank those of you who are here tonight for participating in this debate. Thank you very much for coming.
And thank you to our candidates for their participation in this evening's forum.
Thank you.
We would also like to thank everyone at UW-Rock County for their hospitality in hosting this evening's forum, as well as the candidates and you, the audience, who have the most important job after leaving this auditorium, that of casting your vote on November 4th. Thanks also to Chet Daniels, my show producer during the day and this evening's timer here at the forum. I'd invite you to join me, Tim Bremmel, as we feature a replay of this evening's debate tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. on WCLO 1230 a.m. as part of your talk show. On behalf of the candidates and everyone at UW-Rock County, I wish you a very pleasant good evening.